Vienna, 1907. Just as the imperial waltz echoed through Hofburg's marble halls, Commander Wilder James of the Austro-Hungarian army rode through the northern gate, dust on his boots, blood on his glove, and a sealed letter pressed beneath his coat. The war in Bosnia had ended that morning. He hadn't slept in 2 days. He dismounted with a wince, handed the reins to his stable boy, and strode across the gravel courtyard. The sun gleamed on the gold braid of his uniform, catching on the medals he hadn't bothered to remove. The guard saluted. He didn't return it. He just walked, boots sharp against the stone, toward the wing of the palace where the emperor's private offices waited. He never expected her to be there. "Don't track blood across the rugs," said a voice behind him. Wilder turned. She stood in the corridor's arch like a painting come to life, coated in soft blue silk, the collar high at her throat, her dark hair gathered into braided coils pinned with pearls. Her gloves were still clasped in one hand. Her eyes were the pale gray of an oncoming storm. "Princess Calista," he said, bowing stiffly. "Forgive me." She stepped forward. "What happened to your hand?" "It's nothing." "That's not nothing." She reached for his wrist, not yet touching, but close enough that he felt the heat of her fingers. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The princess, daughter of Emperor Franz Joseph himself, stood inches from him, concerned over the wound of a man who was, by all rights, beneath her. Wilder cleared his throat. "It was a blade. I took the fort at Gabila." "I heard," she said softly. "They said you disarmed the rebel commander at dawn, with only your saber." "I was lucky." "No," she said, eyes still on his hand. "You were brave. And reckless." He didn't answer. She let go of his wrist. "You came to deliver the report?" she asked. He nodded. "My father's in the council chamber. But he won't be long." "I'll wait," he said, though he didn't know why. His orders didn't include lingering in palace corridors talking to royal women. But she didn't leave. Instead, she glanced down the hall, then slipped through a side door. "Come. You can wash that wound properly." "Princess." "Commander," she said without turning. "You've given enough blood for the empire. At least let me give you soap and water." He followed. He always would. The room was small, likely a retiring room for ladies of the court, but quiet. A porcelain basin stood on a marble-topped table next to a pitcher. Sunlight pooled on the tiles. She poured water, dipped a cloth, and took his hand before he could object. He washed her face as she worked. Her fingers were careful, never trembling, though she winced each time she dabbed too hard. "You shouldn't do this," he said quietly. "I know. Your father would have my head. I know that too." The silence stretched. Water dripped from the cloth onto her sleeve. "I'm told you refused the title offered after Sarajevo," she said. "I didn't fight for a title. You could have been a count. I'd rather be a man." She looked up at him then. "You are." Their eyes locked. He felt it in his ribs, the pull, the wrongness of it, the rightness underneath. In this room, behind that closed door, she wasn't a princess and he wasn't a commander. They were just two people, bound by something neither of them had asked for. A knock shattered the moment. "Your Highness." A maid's voice. "The Emperor's waiting." Calista stepped back, the cloth slipping from her hand into the basin. "Go," she said. He hesitated. "Please," she added. He bowed, turned, and left. But as he closed the door behind him, he saw it folded on the table beside the pitcher, half tucked beneath her gloves, a slip of paper he hadn't seen her write. He returned hours later, under cover of dusk. The note had said, "The greenhouse." After Vespers. He should have burned it, should have ignored it, erased her from his mind. But he didn't. The greenhouse behind the palace was kept for rare alpine orchids and night-blooming jasmine. Its glass walls glowed faintly in the moonlight, hidden from the main promenade by a line of cypress trees. She was already there when he arrived, standing between rows of violets, her cloak drawn tight. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "Neither did I," he answered. They stood in silence. The air smelled like damp earth and honey. "I can't stop thinking about you," she said suddenly. "It's wrong. I know it's wrong. I'm sworn to your father," he said, voice rough. "To protect the crown, not to covet it." "You don't covet the crown. You see me. I shouldn't. But you do." He stepped closer. She didn't move. "There's a duel at dawn," he said. "I challenged Count Feldheim. He questioned my loyalty. Said only a traitor would refuse a title. Said I had no right to speak in the Emperor's presence, no matter what I'd bled for." Her eyes widened. "He's your superior. He insulted my honor." You'll be dismissed if you kill him. Then I'll be free. She stepped forward. Free to do what? He hesitated. To love you. Her breath caught. He didn't touch her. Just stood there, letting the words hang between them like smoke. I'll be there, she whispered. At the duel. No. Calista. I'll be there. He left before he could change his mind. Dawn came fast. The courtyard behind the barracks was cold and silent. A line of officers stood as witnesses, faces grim. Count Feldheim waited, tall and sharp-featured, his sword already unsheathed. The man had been gunning for Wilder's disgrace since Sarajevo. The Emperor had not intervened. Wilder stripped off his coat, saluted, and took his stance. The duel began. Steel clashed. Boots scraped. The Count was fast, but Wilder was faster. He let the man draw blood on his arm, nothing fatal, then pivoted, knocked the blade aside, and drove his own saber down, slicing clean through the Count's cravat and into the shoulder. Feldheim dropped. Gasps. Then silence. Wilder stepped back, chest heaving. A figure moved at the edge of the courtyard. Calista. She wore no jewels, no crown. Just a plain wool cloak and gloves. Her face pale in the rising light. She met his gaze. He turned to the onlookers. I resign my commission. But someone began. I will not serve where honor is mocked. He walked away, past the stunned officers, past Feldheim's groans, and toward her. You're free, she said, voice trembling. He nodded. But I have nothing to offer you now. She took his hand. You gave me everything when you chose truth over power. He looked to the palace, then back to her. They'll try to stop us. Then we don't stay. She squeezed his fingers. Come with me. He did. The train to Trieste left before dawn, its iron wheels shrieking against frost-laced tracks as it pulled away from Vienna's southern station. Calista sat facing forward in a second-class compartment, her gloves folded neatly on her lap, her veil drawn low. Wilder sat across from her, shoulders hunched in a borrowed coat, a canvas satchel at his feet. Neither spoke for the first hour. The rhythm of the rails filled the silence, steady and relentless, like a heartbeat they shared. Calista turned her face to the window. I never thought I'd see the world without an escort. Wilder shifted. We'll need new names before we reach the coast. I took care of it, she said, pulling a folded paper from her sleeve. There's a merchant in Trieste who owes my mother's old lady in waiting a favor. He arranged documents for a married couple Austrian-born, bound for Marseille. Wilder stared at her. You planned more than I did. I didn't plan. I hoped. The countryside reeled past in soft grays and browns, the last of winter clinging to the fields. Calista clasped her hands together and said nothing more. At the third stop, a conductor passed through the corridor. Wilder tensed, but the man barely glanced at their tickets. Still, Callista's hand curled tighter in her lap. Are you afraid? Wilder asked. She met his eyes. Yes, but that's not what makes me hesitate. Then what does? I don't know how to live without rules. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've never lived with them. She smiled faintly, something uncertain, fragile. Then you'll have to teach me. By the time they reached Graz, the snow had thickened. The train paused longer than expected. A group of officers passed along the platform, their coats bearing the imperial double-headed eagle. Wilder turned his face toward the window, but Calista did not flinch. They won't look for us on a night train, she whispered. Not this soon. Still, Wilder murmured, we can't stay in Trieste. I know. I heard him speak once, your friend from Sarajevo. The Hungarian poet who published under a false name. Lazar. She nodded. He mentioned a house near Lake Geneva. A safe place for those who step outside the Empire's shadow. Wilder's jaw tightened. That's a long way. And dangerous. I'd rather drown in unfamiliar waters than dry up in a golden cage. The train shuddered and resumed its journey. At dusk, they disembarked under a slate-colored sky. Calista kept her eyes low as they crossed the harbor, the smell of salt and coal thick in the air. Wilder led the way through narrow alleys, past shuttered bakeries and shuttered mouths. He found the shop without asking directions, a place with no sign, just a brass bell and a door knocker shaped like a lion's head. The merchant let them in without a word. He was older than either of them expected, with a limp and a milky eye that never quite focused. He took their coins without counting them, slid 2 envelopes across the counter, and nodded once toward the back. Wilder opened his. The name read, Lucas Adler. Callista's read, Anna. No surname? She asked. The merchant shrugged. A woman's name is what she makes it. They left with their new identities and a worn map marked in pencil. The shipyard, the steward to speak with, the time to board. They spent the night above a shuttered wine cellar, on a mattress that smelled of rosemary and damp stone. There was only one blanket. Wilder offered it to her. "I didn't come this far to be treated like porcelain," she said, settling beside him. "I want the truth of things." He didn't touch her, but he didn't sleep either. In the morning, she sat near the window, brushing her hair with a comb carved from horn. The light caught the curve of her neck, the pale curve of her collarbone. She caught him watching. "You could still go back," she said. "I won't. I need to hear it," she said, quieter. He stood, crossed the room, took her hand. "I walked away from everything I knew," he said. "But I didn't walk into nothing. I walked toward you." She closed her eyes. "I was afraid I imagined that." "You didn't." She leaned her forehead against his chest. His hand came to rest at the small of her back, fingertips barely touching. She breathed, and he felt it how she pressed closer on the exhale, how her grip on his side tightened, not with desperation but with trust. They boarded that evening. The steward looked at their papers, then waved them through. No questions. The ship pulled away from the dock. Calista stood at the railing, the wind pulling strands of hair from her braid. Wilder came up beside her. "My father will send men," she said without glancing at him. "I know. They'll be thorough. They'll be too late." She turned to him fully, the sea behind her, the past shrinking into the mist. "I want a life with you, even if we build it with scraps." He didn't answer. He just reached for her hand, and she gave it to him. The ship docked in Marseille 4 days later, its hull groaning as it settled against the stone quay. The air was warmer there, tinged with brine and citrus oil from crates stacked along the harbor. Calista stepped onto the gangplank with a scarf tied beneath her chin, her eyes fixed on the ochre skyline rising beyond the masts. Wilder followed with their single trunk balanced on his shoulder. They didn't linger near the port. The contact in Geneva had left instructions bundled in the lining of Calista's cloak, carefully inked directions to a coach bound for Avignon, then a transfer north through the Rhone Valley by way of a grain convoy. There were no names, only locations and times, marked with the precision of someone who had hidden many before them. In the back of the cart that carried them past lavender fields and shuttered farmhouses, Calista read aloud from a dog-eared volume of Goethe she had found in a basket under her seat. Her voice was soft, her accent shaped by Viennese tutors but softened now by fatigue and unslept nights. Wilder listened without interrupting, the cadence of her reading folding into the rhythm of wheels on dirt. At dusk, they stopped near a vineyard where an old woman had offered them bread and boiled lentils in exchange for help mending the fence that had collapsed in a spring storm. Wilder worked until his shirt was soaked through. Calista held the lantern as he hammered the final post into the soil. The woman watched them from the porch and said nothing until their plates were scraped clean. "You're not merchants," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "No," Calista replied, setting down her fork. "But we don't bring trouble. I wouldn't feed you if I thought you did." Wilder rinsed the dishes in the basin. The woman lit a second lamp and pointed to the loft. "The hay's clean. Sleep there. Leave before the sun catches you." They did. And when they continued north the following morning, Calista sat closer to him beneath the tarp, her shoulder brushing his. She didn't speak of Vienna. Neither did he. In Lyon, they changed names again. The man waiting at the inn handed them 2 sets of documents and a sealed letter, its crest broken and re-sealed in wax. There was no greeting, only a line in Hungarian. "You are not the first to begin anew." Beneath it, an address near Vevey, nestled between the lake and the mountains. They reached the village by foot, the last leg of the journey winding through chestnut groves and narrow paths carved into the hillside. Callista's shoes tore at the heel, but she didn't complain. Wilder carried their trunk alone, one strap digging into his palm until the skin split. The house was modest wood-framed shutters, a tiled roof with moss between the slates, and a low stone wall that curved around a small orchard. A gardener waved them through the gate, saying only, "They've been expecting you." Inside, a woman in her 50s offered them water and a spare room with a view of the lake. She had once served in the Austro-Hungarian court, though she didn't say how she had come to be here. Her eyes lingered on Callista's face, but she asked no questions. That night, Calista stood by the window in her shift, the moonlight silvering the floorboards. Wilder sat on the edge of the bed, untying his boots slowly. "There's something I wanted to ask you in Vienna," she said. He looked up. "When you turned down the title. If I hadn't been in the palace that day, would you have accepted it?" "No," he said, "but I wouldn't have known why." She nodded once, then crossed the room. "I used to think duty was carved in stone, that we had no choice in how we carried it. And now, I think we choose what we carry, and who we carry it for." She reached for his hand. He took it. They moved slowly. There was no rush in it, no breathless urgency. Only the quiet certainty of two people who had run far enough to finally stop. In the weeks that followed, they kept to the orchard and the rooms that overlooked the lake. Wilder helped mend the garden walls, and Calista began sketching again. Using charcoal, she made herself from the burnt ends of grapevines. The lines she drew were careful but unflinching figures with truth in their shoulders, landscapes that didn't flatter but remembered. One morning, Wilder returned from the market with a folded newspaper. The headline bore the imperial crest. He laid it gently on the table. Her father had issued a statement. It named her missing. Not dead, not disowned. Missing. Calista traced the edge of the page. "He's buying time. He's not sending soldiers." "No, not yet." She folded the paper and tucked it into the drawer. "It doesn't change anything." Wilder watched her. "Would you go back if he asked?" "Not unless he asked me to live." She closed the drawer and turned toward him. "I don't miss court," she said, "but I miss the sound of a language I don't have to hide in." "I speak it," he said quietly. "With you." She smiled, not out of relief or defiance, but like someone who had finally remembered a song they thought lost. "The orchard will bloom soon," she said. He nodded. "We'll plant more trees." They stepped outside into the waking light. The soil was soft beneath their boots. The sky above the lake broke open into blue. By early May, the orchard's branches hung heavy with blossom. Pale petals gathered in the grass like scraps of forgotten lace, stirred by the breeze that carried the lake's breath into the valley. Calista stood barefoot beneath the apricot tree, a linen apron tied over her skirt, her fingers stained from pressing the first petals between the pages of a ledger she had repurposed for her drawings. Wilder approached from the garden path, sleeves rolled to the elbow, carrying a wooden frame he had built from split pine. He knelt beside her without speaking, setting it down among the roots where the sun fell strongest. "You've measured it carefully?" Calista asked. "It will hold," he said, brushing soil from his knees. "The glass arrives next week." She crouched beside him, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I never imagined I'd have a place to protect something so delicate." "You've always protected delicate things." "Yes," she said, "but never with my own hands." They worked in silence after that, arranging the soil, anchoring the frame with stones. Wilder paused only when she straightened too quickly and winced, one hand pressed to her back. "You should rest." "I'm not tired," she said, but she sat anyway, legs folded beneath her. He watched her a moment, then lowered himself beside her on the grass. "I heard from Lazar," he said, pulling a letter from the inside of his shirt. He had it carried by a trader who passed through the vineyards 3 days ago. She opened the paper carefully. The handwriting was thin, deliberate, with certain words coded in Hungarian idioms she hadn't heard since she was a child. "He says there's talk in Vienna," she murmured. "A shift in the court. The emperor's health is failing." She looked up sharply. "How do you know?" "There's a line in the letter. The lion does not roar as he once did. He wouldn't write that unless he meant it." Calista folded the letter once more and held it in her lap. The birds in the trees had gone quiet. "A change in power could mean danger," she said. "Or it could mean nothing," Wilder replied. "But I thought you should know." She studied the orchard for a long moment, then reached for his hand. "I won't mourn what's already gone," she said. "But I won't pretend it never mattered." He nodded once, and they said nothing more. That evening, after the sun had dipped behind the ridge, they dressed for supper with the woman who kept the house. Her name was Anne-Marie, though she rarely used it, preferring Madame, even in private. She had once served in the imperial kitchens, and her stewed duck and wild garlic soup bore the unmistakable mark of formal training. "I have news," she said over the second course, setting down her wineglass. "A visitor arrived this morning. A man who asked for you both by your new names." Callista's hand paused over her fork. "Did you speak with him?" "I did. I told him you'd gone south. He left a parcel." Wilder's posture stiffened. "What kind of parcel?" A book, bound in leather. No note. After the meal, she brought it out. Calista turned it in her hands, then opened to the center. A pressed edelweiss had been pinned between 2 pages. There, in faint pencil, a gift for those who remember the cold. F.J. She closed the book slowly. It's his handwriting. Wilder frowned. Your father's? No. My brother's. Ferdinand. I thought he was in Galicia. He was. But he must have heard. He was never cruel, only obedient. You think he's offering peace? I think he's offering memory. She set the book aside and stood. Let's walk. They stepped into the evening air, the stars already sharp above the lake. Calista led him down the path toward the lower field, where the grasses had grown wild and tall. I used to dream of escape, she said suddenly. But in the dreams, I was always alone. I didn't believe anyone would come with me. I didn't come with you, Wilder said. I met you halfway. She smiled faintly. Do you miss the army? No, but I miss knowing what comes next. So do I, she said. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of the unknown. She stopped walking and turned to him. I've been thinking, she said, about the land above the orchard. The slope catches the morning light. We could build a room there, for painting, and another for storage. You could keep your tools where they won't rust. You've named the rooms? Only in my head. Wilder reached for her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Then let's build them. They stood there until the chill settled in. When they returned to the house, the lamp in the window had been left burning, and the fire in the hearth was still warm. Calista paused at the threshold, looking back once. Tomorrow, she said, I'd like to start planting lavender. Something that stays. He didn't answer. He only followed her inside.